Have you ever wondered what people write when they know it's the last letter they'll ever send? It isn't advice. It isn't apology. It's a form of surrender, a moment where the soul begins to speak the truth the mind has been avoiding all its life. Some write to forgive themselves, some write to say thank you, and some just want to leave a reminder. Don't waste your days trying to be remembered. Spend them remembering what it means to be alive. Imagine receiving a letter like that from someone who has already crossed that invisible line between living and leaving. What would it say to you? Would it tell you to slow down? To love louder? To stop waiting for the right moment and make this one right? Because maybe the truth is simple. The dying don't want us to mourn them, they want us to learn from them. They say, when a person is about to die, time changes its shape. Minutes stretch like eternity, and everything that once felt important suddenly fades into silence. In a dimly lit hospital room, there lies a letter unfinished. The ink has dried midway through a sentence. Beside it, an old man's breathing grows slower, steadier, as if his body already knows what his mind has just realized, that there is no more later. For most of his life, he thought meaning lived in tomorrow, in plans, in achievements, in promises he would keep once he had more time. But now, as the heart monitor whispers its quiet rhythm, he sees that meaning was never hiding in the future. It was always here, in the quiet spaces between breaths. There's something sacred about the final hours of life. People stop pretending. They stop chasing. They begin to see, not with their eyes, but with something deeper. Hospice nurses often say, the dying rarely talk about success. They talk about laughter that was never repeated, hands they never held long enough, words they should have said sooner. In those moments, no one asks for more years. They ask for one more sunset, one more chance to tell someone, I love you. Every word written in those final hours carries the weight of an entire lifetime. It's not just paper and ink, it's the voice of clarity born from the edge of existence. And tonight, we'll open those letters, not to find answers, but to remember the questions we've forgotten to ask. Arthur was 82 when he began writing his final letters. Not to his lawyer, not to his doctor, but to his grandchildren, 3 children who still thought the world was infinite. He wrote them every morning in a small wooden chair beside the window. Outside, autumn leaves drifted down like slow-burning time. Inside, his oxygen machine hummed quietly, a reminder that each word he wrote was borrowed from his last remaining breaths. He didn't write about regret. He didn't write about fear. He wrote about small things. The smell of rain on old wood. The taste of tea that had gone cold while laughing with someone you love. The warmth of sunlight across the skin, the kind you never notice when you think you have forever. In one of his letters, he wrote, I used to think life was about collecting things, money, success, recognition. But now I see it was never about having. It was about feeling. The heart remembers sensations the mind has long forgotten. He told them how he once chased everything that didn't matter, promotions, applause, approval, and how now, as his body weakened, he realized meaning had been following him quietly all along, in the laughter of his wife, in the sound of his grandson's questions, in the peace that came when he finally stopped running. Hospice nurses say something remarkable happens near the end. People begin to speak differently. They stop saying, I want. They start saying, I wish. And slowly, those wishes turn into gratitude. Arthur wrote about that too. If you ever lose everything, remember, you still have the sky. Look up. The same stars that watched me will one day watch you. That means we were never really apart. Psychologists who study death say that people's last reflections often return to one truth, that love, not as romance, but as presence, is the only thing that seems to survive the fear of dying. Arthur didn't need science to tell him that. He could feel it in the quiet between his heartbeats. On the morning he passed away, his daughter found the final letter on his desk. It wasn't sealed. The ink was still wet. And on that fragile paper were just 6 words. Don't wait to live your life. She read it aloud, tears catching her breath, not from sorrow, but from realization. Her father hadn't written those words for himself. He'd written them for everyone still pretending to be immortal. In those final letters, Arthur gave the living something sacred, a reminder that the end doesn't destroy meaning. It reveals it, because when the dying speak, they aren't talking about death. They're teaching us how to live before it comes. Arthur's letters weren't just words on paper, they were a map of awakening. They show what happens when the noise of life finally quiets, and the mind is forced to face the one truth it spent a lifetime avoiding. We are temporary. But here's the paradox. When people truly face the end, they don't collapse into despair. They begin to see with a clarity the living rarely taste. Psychologists call it death awareness. It's the moment the illusion of endless time dissolves, and what's left is essence. Every smile, every touch, every cup of tea becomes sacred. Because when you realize it could be your last, you finally see it. Research in existential psychology shows that people who reflect on mortality often become calmer, kinder, and more grateful. Because death strips away what's unnecessary. Arthur didn't write about dying. He wrote about remembering. And that's what many of us forget while living. We are so busy trying to become someone that we forget to be here. We plan. We chase deadlines, thinking they define our worth. But one day, life gives us a different kind of deadline, one we can't reschedule. And suddenly, the question isn't, what did I achieve? It's, did I feel it all while I still could? Think about it. Every sunrise you've seen was unique in all of time. Every face you've loved will one day be a memory. Every heartbeat is one closer to silence. And yet, in that awareness, there's peace. Because maybe life was never about lasting forever. Maybe it was about feeling deeply, knowing that we will not. Ernest Becker once wrote that humans build their entire world to deny death. We chase legacy, wealth, religion, anything that promises continuity. But what if the real courage isn't in escaping death? It's in looking it in the eye and saying, I know you're coming, but I will live beautifully until you do. When Arthur wrote, "Don't wait to live your life," he wasn't giving advice. He was describing the final awakening, the moment when the future no longer exists, and all that's left is now. And here's the quiet truth psychology often forgets to say: facing death isn't about learning to die. It's about learning to live consciously, to notice the way light bends through a window, to listen when someone laughs, to speak gently, knowing that every word might be a last. Arthur's letters weren't meant to be read once. They were meant to be lived. Every day we wake up pretending we have forever. Maybe that's what the dying are trying to tell us, that clarity doesn't come from years, or wisdom, or philosophy. It comes the moment we stop asking, "How long do I have?" and start whispering, "How deeply can I love while I'm here?" Because in the end, it's not death that terrifies us. It's the thought of reaching it and realizing we never truly lived. There's a moment near death that medicine can measure, but cannot explain. The heartbeat slows, the brain releases one final storm of electrical light, and then stillness. But those who have stood at the edge and returned, the ones who saw the other side for just a heartbeat, they describe something science can't put into a chart. A light, a warmth, a feeling of being home. Doctors call it the near-death experience. Some say it's the brain's final defense, a flood of endorphins, a dying neuron's hallucination. But others believe it's a glimpse through the veil, a reminder that consciousness, whatever it truly is, may not be trapped within the body. Modern neuroscience has begun to ask questions once left to mystics. If every cell in the body changes over time, why does the self remain? Where is the I that watches thoughts, feels emotions, but is not them? Quantum physics, in its quiet poetry, hints that energy never dies. It only changes form. And if consciousness is energy, then perhaps what we call death is not an ending, but a transformation, a return. Ancient traditions have whispered the same truth for centuries. The Tibetan Book of the Dead calls death a mirror for the living, a passage where the soul dissolves back into its origin. Hindu philosophy says the Atman, the inner self, is never born and never dies. It merely changes its clothing. Even Christianity, in its gentlest promise, says that to be absent from the body is to be present with light. Maybe Arthur understood this too, in his own quiet way. Maybe that's why his letters felt less like farewells, and more like echoes from somewhere beyond. He once wrote, "If you ever feel me near, it's because love never learned how to leave." Perhaps love is the thread that binds both worlds, the living and the gone, the seen and the unseen. Science studies what happens to the body. Spirituality listens to what happens to the soul. And somewhere in between those two languages, between neurons and prayer, between energy and emotion, there's something that feels like truth. Maybe death isn't the opposite of life at all. Maybe it's the other side of love, the side we only understand when we let go. When a candle burns out, the flame doesn't die. It becomes heat, it becomes light, it becomes memory. So perhaps when we lose someone, they don't vanish. They simply change their form, from presence to essence, from body to story, from human to something eternal that still whispers in our quiet moments, "I am still here." Arthur's letters may have ended, but their meaning didn't. Each word still travels, like ripples through time, reminding the living that death isn't a wall. It's a door. And when it opens, it doesn't take love away. It reveals where it truly lived all along. The room is quiet now. The letter lies open on the table, its ink faded slightly, its words still alive. Arthur's hand may no longer hold the pen, but his voice lingers, not in sound, but in feeling. He once wrote, "When I'm gone, don't look for me in the ground. Look for me in the sunlight that touches your face, in the laughter that fills your kitchen, in the silence that understands you." It's strange, isn't it? We spend our lives fearing death, yet the dying seem to fear it the least. Maybe they've seen what we can't, that death doesn't take us away from life. It gives life its shape. Without endings, there would be no meaning. Without darkness, no dawn. The truth the dying leave behind is not about loss. It's about presence. They remind us that nothing real ever truly goes away. Psychologists once said memory is just the brain preserving data. But what if memory is something more sacred? What if remembering someone is how the soul keeps them alive? Every time you speak their name, every time you feel gratitude instead of grief, you pull a thread of them back into the world. Because maybe love isn't an emotion, maybe it's a form of energy that refuses to disappear. It moves through time, through stories, through the very atoms that once made us whole. Arthur's last words, "Don't wait to live your life," weren't meant to haunt us. They were meant to wake us, to remind us that the clock is always ticking, and the miracle was never in how long we live, but in how deeply we notice while we do. So tonight, if you sit alone and wonder where they've gone, those you've loved, those you've lost, close your eyes. Listen. You'll find them everywhere. In the rain, in the scent of morning, in the pulse of your own heart reminding you, you're still here to love. And one day, when your time comes, when your own hand begins to tremble over the page, you might realize something beautiful, that death was never a thief. It was the hand that turns the final page, so the story can become eternal. Arthur's letter ends like this. If you remember one thing, remember this. Love was never a thing to find. It was what you were made of. Maybe that's what all letters from the dying are trying to say. That life isn't measured in years, but in awareness. That goodbye is just another word for transformation. And that when the final silence comes, there's nothing to fear. Because what we truly are was never something death could touch. The letter may end here, but the message never does. Keeps living inside you.